Hello! Today we are in our saddlery, and the topic of today's video is D1 and D2 and what we call in German offenes System. And because it has now become international, we are calling it open fitting system, and this is a term that just has to be explained, and along with that I want to explain the history of the D1 and the D2 so that everyone can understand that whole story. And in previous videos I already announced that I wanted to discuss this whole topic separately, and the day is today that we are discussing that topic. Historically, it's like that. I already mentioned that in the video where I introduced myself, that I have my own riding career and I worked with different horses. I had different focuses. I come from show jumping originally, but I also trained many dressage horses. And then as a customer one day, I had a horse and I decided I'll get a custom fitted saddle for that horse, and the process was very impressive. I was so excited to receive my saddle, but unfortunately the result was that the horse just wouldn't move well with that saddle, and I thought, well, maybe that's just my horse, my problem, but I kept hearing that story from other people. And then also another thing that I want to mention is that I had this very old, very loose fitting saddle. It was very wide and I put it on almost every horse, put a blanket underneath or a pad, a cloth, something, anything, whatever was a trendy pad version at the time. And I, just worked with that, did the best I could. The horses were moving very well with that. Until one day, that old saddle that I put it on every horse, and that saddle started making weird noises, some squeaking, and then eventually it just broke, and I understood, well, I need to get it fixed, and I went to a tack shop in my neighborhood, and they took a look at the saddle and they told me the saddle tree is broken, the gullet plate is broken, you need to send it to the manufacturer to get it repaired. And I listened to the experts, as you do as a customer, and I sent it to the manufacturer. It was a German manufacturer, a leader on the market at the time, and they then told me that the saddle tree has been broken for a long time, actually. There is a lot of rust at the points where it fractured, and that's how we can tell that it has been broken for 1 or 2 years, maybe even longer. But because of the wool and other parts of the saddle tree, I wasn't able to hear anything before. And so I was a student at the time, and I paid a lot of money for a new saddle tree and a new gullet plate. And after what felt like months, it finally was repaired and I got it back. And then I used the saddle, I was riding with it, and nothing was working. None of the horses were moving well, even those that I had used the saddle with prior. And I was very frustrated, and eventually I sold that saddle with one of the horses that I sold. So that's that story. But I always remembered that this old saddle with the broken gullet plate was good for the horses. I never forgot that. And then, years later, custom fitted saddles came around, and I thought, oh fine, I'll treat myself and my horse to one of these saddles, and then, well, that was even worse, like I told you before, and I was very frustrated by that situation, but I just decided I'll put it behind me and I'll just do the best I can with the saddles that are around. And then eventually, with my wife at the time, we took over a tack shop, and then obviously saddles were a topic, and I have always been interested in that, so I dove into it. I absorbed all the information. I visited the manufacturers, and on site I found out what are the structures inside a saddle, how does it work, how can I work with it. So I absorbed all the knowledge to make the decisions what is right or not right for a horse. And I noticed at that point that no matter what saddle you buy or where on the planet you buy it, it comes essentially down to two systems. Well, technically one is a system and one isn't, but from an outside perspective, if you're not a horse person, it looks like two systems. So one is a closed fitting system where you have a gullet plate of some form and it is fitted to the horse, and you have the panels and a filling of wool, latex, whatever. But essentially the saddle is placed on the horse as it is standing still. It is supported by the ends of the gullet plate, and it will be stable on the horse. So if you have a horse with a wither size of 33, that horse will get a saddle with a wither size of 33. So no matter what type of saddle you buy, this is what saddle making is based on, even in Western saddles. And then the other concept that is around are saddles with no tree. So it is described as a saddle without a tree, but essentially it is just something without a stiff structure in it. So it's kind of like riding bareback. So whether you just use a thick blanket or some pieces of felt working together, essentially it's just a material that's different. But it is supposed to feel for the horse as if the rider was sitting on it without anything. What I think is problematic is that sometimes people put stirrups on those, and I think for stirrups you need a saddle tree to protect the spine, but especially for those horses that are very round in shape, it works quite well and the horses enjoy that. So these are the two systems that have been around. And then there I was with the mostly difficult horses that I was working with. That was the niche that I was working in at the time. I did enjoy that work and it paid very well. And then I just stood there and I kept having the same problems. The horses just would not move, and the better the saddle fit, the worse they moved. And if you were riding them without a saddle, it was no problem at all. And this contradiction accompanied me for so many years, 10, 12, 15 years even, as a rider and as a trainer. And then I started this business in the year 2000. And I researched saddles more, and for 5 years I sold those established brands, and I started early on making some small modifications, but all of a sudden it was me that went out there and placed that saddle on a horse according to the instructions of the craft and of the manufacturers, and I just noticed the horses don't really get better with that, and that for me was very frustrating. Maybe it wouldn't have been for a craftsman who does not do any riding themselves, but for me, whose job it was to bring horses back into the sport, was just a very frustrating situation. And this ended up being the origin of the D1, actually, because I had these horses that had broad, strong shoulders that were able to do big movements, and they had a very agile upper arm. Great horses when you let them run free or at the lunge. And I had these customers that I wanted to sell my expensive saddles to, and I placed those saddles on the horse, and I saw that the horses were moving less, they're not as fluently, and I saw the riders working so hard to get them to move well, squeezing, pressing, and it would take them up to 20 minutes to just get them to closely move like they would move naturally without anything on their back. And that was very frustrating to watch. And I guess depending on what attitude is towards that situation, it affects how you deal with it. But I personally have always been someone that questioned things, and especially after that story I just told you with the custom-fitted saddle and with the saddle with the broken gullet plate, I was always open to finding my own truths and to challenge the norms of the craft. And then I had a customer, Marion Henkel. She was a German show jumping champion and then also did dressage competitions, great rider. And she, in her saddle, she wanted to feel the horse move easily, fluently. And her horse at the time, Prince Paul was his name. He was very limited in his shoulder movement and he just wouldn't walk well. And then I also had two more horses, a Trocchina stallion from Leonie Bramal and another horse of a Légèreté trainer in Hamburg. So these three people came to me with their difficult horses and I had to tell them, I'm sorry, I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to fix your horse's problems. But especially Marion told me, just try, I'll go with anything you want, no matter what it costs, I'll support you. And then we had the idea of going against all the conventions and rules of the craft, and we would just experiment. And then I tried by removing parts of the panels, by using elastics or non-elastic materials, gullet plates or no gullet plates. I just tried so many different things and asked the horses, or in this case Prince Paul, what works for you, what allows you to move. And if you are not scared to try these things, and if you have a client that is very supportive of you and says it doesn't matter if you fail, that is a great opportunity. And this is how we created the D1. We said the horses need the freedom for the shoulders, and this is the D1 here, actually the first one that was made in serial production. You can see the number here. The last 4 digits are the date when it was built, February 2006. So I've been working on this D1 project since 2005. You can see that the saddle has been used, but I think it still looks great. So this was the first one that we made. And this is the saddle of Prince Paul. So we started by making these cutouts here in the front to guarantee some freedom for the shoulders. At first, we were experimenting with some English saddles that had very thick panels, but then Prestige said, we will build these saddles for you. And then what we did is we added that elastic front girth strip. And yes, then we had this saddle. If you were to place it on the horse like this, without anything underneath, it would seesaw up and down. It wasn't stable because the wither size, so the sum of gullet width and panel, got bigger because of the cutouts that we made in the front. So the saddle could no longer stabilize itself, but the horses absolutely loved it. And this was the birth hour of the open fitting system. And today, after 15 years, and after these saddles, the D1 and the D2, have been successful worldwide, and after 15 years, we are finally able to label it as a system on its own, open fitting system as opposed to the closed fitting system that was common up until now. And this is a fitting system, hence the name Open Fitting System, OFS. And it is based on the belief that the wither size of a saddle does not need to match the horse. So that means we're just moving away from the main measurement that we had for saddle making, that was the wither size. Many people think that the wither size can be compared to the shoe size of a human. So imagine you're a size 39, so you wouldn't go buy a shoe size 42, right? So the picture comparing the wither size to a shoe size that many people have in their head is wrong, first of all, because the horse does not have just one shoe size, but the shoe size changes with movement. So this OFS system is more applicable to real situations because it takes that into account, that the shoe size of a horse, in quotation marks, changes. And the OFS system is based on that. And then many people also compare it to when they decide to get a green, blue, yellow gullet plate. And they know, well, this is not working out, and then they think, yeah, that shoe size comparison, that is true, but it is like with riding boots, right? Just knowing that your shoe size is 39 does not mean you can order a boot of the internet, because you need instep measurements, you need to know how high and how wide you want it at the calves, zipper, no zipper. There are so many details that need to be taken into account. And this is how it is with saddles. But also with saddles, not even the shoe size is a reliable measurement. Because, again, if you were human, and we would apply that, so when you were walking, when you were jogging, when you were running, you would always have a different shoe size. And this OFS system essentially focuses on the human that is sprinting, running at full speed. And it uses that shoe size for making a shoe, and not the one that the human has when they were sitting still. And you can imagine that this is quite difficult to achieve, because the shoe would feel weird to you, right? And after much research and much experimenting, we actually found out how to achieve that. And this is the core of the open-fitting systems. Because, as I said, I will show you on the horse how it looks. But yeah, these are the key points that you need to know about it. And then some more history about the D1 and the D2. Usually, right, when you develop a product, you always have some basic research first. Scientists looking into it, in this case it would be veterinarians and maybe riding theorists. The federations should look into that, how up-to-date the saddles are, obviously because the horses now look different in shape than horses from 1912, and also male and female riders are different. And that's not a secret, but unfortunately not as big of a topic yet. But usually there is research first, and then we gain insights from that research, and then based on those insights, new products are developed. That's how it is in many fields, developing batteries or hydrogen technology, whatever. So research first and then the products. But in equestrianism, or especially with this system, it was developed in a practical situation because individual riders felt the need for something new, and veterinarians, manual therapists, physical therapists, they always had to treat the same injuries, and riders were saying, my horse is limited, so we said we'll do this empirically. We see and we witness that this pattern is not working, so we are trying to change it. And after 15 years, and this is where equestrianism is different than the other fields, I finally have the opportunity to work with very well-established and very competent people in veterinary medicine and also at universities in anatomy. I am able to work with them and to do some research so that we can create some evidence for what we know that works in reality and what we see that it works. And we just can get some scientific facts to back that, because obviously for this system to be available and applicable for everyone in the world, we need some scientific evidence to back it up. And I'm so proud that I am a part of that, and it shows me that we are on the right path. And I just said there's some history to that. So this is the first D1. At the time, my old shop, Reitsport Engelke, we sold that exclusively. We bought a minimum quantity from Prestige and we sold that. It was my saddle, basically. And then we got lucky. Some coincidences just happened. Hinrich Romeike, with his horse Marius, got one of these saddles. Prestige hooked them up with one of their saddles because his horse had problems with the restriction of shoulder movement. And then those two became Olympic champions twice, and surely that was not solely because of the saddle. But he said in interviews that he got a new saddle and it wasn't in news, that there was something new in the market, and then overnight, I was no longer a freak, but an innovator, a developer, and I took that opportunity. So we continued development, and a few years later, we made the D10 that allowed especially women to sit more comfortably. And we also developed the X technology, introducing membranes into the saddle tree and changing the panels a little bit. And we continued working, and it was always based on that open fitting systems, but we tried to improve the feel for the rider, to make it feel more conventional, because we had this extremely different system, but we wanted to make it feel more familiar, and we achieved that by tailoring the saddle more, making it more narrow for the rider without making it more narrow for the horse. But obviously there are limitations to that, because the more narrow a saddle is, traditionally it feels better for us humans, but the worse it feels for the horse. So at some point I had to tell my customers, no, we cannot make it more narrow, because that would be against the nature of the D1 and against the nature of the open fitting system. I talk about this in detail in the video, difference between the D1 and D2 unisex trees. So if you want to refresh your knowledge on that, feel free to go back and watch this video. But then the next big step that we took was making the D2. And we again based it on the open fitting system, but we changed our way of thinking. We were thinking men, women, how is their sitting position in the saddle? And we challenged existing norms of what a saddle tree and what a saddle is supposed to be. And this is how the unisex trees in the D2s were developed. And the product range that we have across the D1 and the D2 products is enormous. We have the normal D1, we have it as a mono flap, we have it as the Icelandic version with a flat seat. You can use it for Icelandic horses, but for many other types of horses as well. Then we have the 4 different versions of the D2. So we have an entire family of saddles at Prestige now. And they've all been very successful around the world. And because of that, it is now justified that we can call it open fitting system, because the numbers that we sold of these saddles across the market established it as a different fitting system, as a third option. And now we'll soon have research to back it up, and I'm very excited to support my products by scientific studies. As of now, I can only tell you that it works. Obviously, the fitting process is different, but if you know how to do it, and if you do it right, you will have a saddle that just is able to do so much more for you than other saddles, and it is so fun to work with that. I will show you how it looks on the horse in a moment. But this basically was the history of the D1 and my history, and yeah, let's take a look. So we are in our arena now. This is Lorenzo, 4-year-old Hanoverian. You already know him from the anatomy video. We'll do something similar now, but this time we really want to show you the OFS, the open fitting system, in more detail. So first we need to take a closer look at Lorenzo. This is the saddle area, and here is the shoulder blade, and here is where we measure the wither size. And if you now imagine, cut the horse open, and these are the 2 shoulder blades, and here is the thoracic spine. It goes up and down, there's no collarbone, it can move freely, and earlier the range of motion in horses was a lot smaller than it is today, they're more agile. So saddle fitting today is much more relevant than it was 20 years ago. So this is the horse as it is standing still. And if you take a look at this area and I now make him curve his back by pressing that reflex point, you can see that the back becomes a lot wider. What I'm just simulating here is something between trot and gallop. So you can see that there is a big difference, 1 to 1.5 wither sizes difference between the standing and the moving horse. And the OFS system wants to make a saddle that fits the horse that moves and not the horse that stands still, where we would just have that one wither size. And I'll just show you by placing an average commercially available saddle representing the closed fitting system. And we'll put it on the horse and just show you what that would look like. Just let me get the saddle. Okay, so here you can see very clearly that the saddle goes parallel to the shoulder blade. So if you imagine the gullet plate on the inside, it goes parallel to the shoulder of the horse. I mean, you can't say that it is super exact because the shoulder is covered by flesh and muscle, but you can see the lines they're going parallel. If I slide my hand in, it feels very even, and many of my colleagues would say this wither size fits that horse. So we are now putting on the girths. And now you can see that we have the front girth strip. It is attached directly to the gullet plate, and this is necessary for many horses because the dressage saddles would slide. And then we have this 3-point Y girthing that is slightly adjustable. So basically what we have in many saddles. And if I put pressure on the top, you can see the saddle does not move. And even if I open the girth and I press, there is nothing moving, nothing sliding around, because the gullet plate is matching the wither size of the horse as it is standing still. So this is conventional saddle making, conventional closed fitting system in a way that is nicely done. But this is not what we want to achieve with the OFS system. The open fitting system wants to make a saddle for the horse that moves. So now I have a D2 here. So both of these saddles are in use to make it more authentic. And let's get the same angle here. And we had to give that up, right? There's nothing parallel here anymore. If you follow the lines, you can see the saddle goes outward a bit, and on the inside you can see some room for the shoulder. And the entire front third of the saddle is a lot wider than the horse, as it is just standing there. And beneath you can see we have the front girth strip as well, and the Y girthing. So this is, well, something familiar, right, as you know it, as it is in other saddles as well. So let's get him in a nice standing position. And now let me show you what the saddle does if it is too wide. If I put pressure on here, you can see it goes up and down. It moves quite a lot. Obviously, because there is nothing that can support the saddle in the front. And then I take the back strap, and you can see the saddle slides back a tiny little bit. And now the saddle with this girthing that is actually necessary for the OFS systems, and it is perfectly in place like a conventional saddle would be as well. But the reason for it is different, because here I have an elastic front girth strip, so no matter what hole I choose, I cannot make it tight. And this is super important, because if I was able to make it tight, I would press and pull the system down on the horse, and then it would be too tight and the horse couldn't move. And by making it elastic, we prevent that, and it will always be a bit loose. There was a video in 2008 that we made, it is still on YouTube, where we explained that. But basically, this part of the system has not changed much. If I now have a rider that is doing a rising trot and is putting some weight on the stirrup bar, which is very close to the front, it could happen that it presses against the horse in the front a little bit, and this is something that has been critiqued, and it's a fair point about the OFS. And also this saddle gets flat in the front after a long time of using it, and not like many other saddles that get flat in the back. So that's a fundamental difference. And because the point where the horse is moving extremely, for Lorenzo it's here, for other horses might be a different place. I'll show you again, this is the part that's going up. For him it's a little bit further back. And this is why we made the Trapezium Pad. We developed it specifically for the D1 and the D2. Because we wanted to take the individuality of the different horses and their different shapes and movements into account. And you cannot get the same exact result with any other pad. And by placing the pad underneath, what we achieve is that we reduce the effect of putting pressure on the horse when the rider leans forward. It does not change anything about the wither size, it does not get tighter for the horse, there is still open space for the shoulder here in the front. It is hard to believe that this small piece of fabric actually has that effect, but we know it works, and it works in the long term as well. So this is the OFS, open fitting system, and it is fundamentally different to the closed systems. And I think you can see very clearly that when the horse wants to move, and if it can move like that, there is no restriction and no limit for the horse. It can move into the saddle. And this is the core of this system and the core of the technology within the D1 and the D2 and this entire saddle family that guarantees the shoulder freedom for the horse in combination with a too wide wither size and an elastic front girth strip. The horses love it, it is fun.